So we're recording this on April 25th. So this is 4 days after Pope Francis passed away. And you have an article coming out any minute, you mentioned before we hit record, in America, where you write about your love for Pope Francis and the time you were graced to meet him. So there's a really wonderful story behind that I'd love for you to get into. Can you tell us that story about meeting him, and then also about what stood out to you about his own love and appreciation for art?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a memory that goes back to almost 2 years to May of 2023. My center was sponsoring a conference in Rome for writers, Catholic writers from around the world, along with Georgetown University, Civital Cattolica, the great Jesuit Italian Jesuit journal, and also the Hank Center at Loyola, Chicago. So we invited 40, there were between 40 and 60 writers who came to Rome and spent several days reading to each other. And we were very happy to find out that Pope Francis heard about our conference from one of our sponsors, Antonio Spadaro, who is a fellow Jesuit. And Pope Francis wanted to address us. So he wrote an address just for us. And then he invited us to the Vatican to hear the address as part of a delegation, an audience. But then he invited us up to meet him individually. So we were, as you might imagine, very excited about this possibility. It was the last day of our conference, so we all went over to the Vatican, and we went into this beautiful room. It's a room where he frequently receives people. Just monumental. Depictions of the life of Jesus and biblical scenes all over the walls and marble everywhere. And I was thinking to myself, like, wow, talk about the Catholic imagination at work. Like, I can only imagine what it's like to go to work every day at a place like this. Lucky Pope Francis, right? So we waited for him. He came in. He read the address to us, and the address was deeply moving. I don't think any of us realized how important literature and art has been to Francis all his life. He mentions the fact that he was a school teacher. He taught high school boys when he was in Argentina, and he thanks those kids in his address for giving him the reason, an excuse really, to read the great writers of the Western canon, to read Dostoevsky, to read Dante, and to be able to explore his the regions of his own heart and soul. And these writers still mean a great deal to him spiritually. So the address was pretty short. It's really only a few paragraphs, but it's basically a very pastoral letter in which he really encourages us and enjoins us as writers to follow our imaginations. And it's very Ignatian because, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who is one of my favorite saints because I've spent all of my adult life teaching in Jesuit universities, is a great proponent of the imagination. And so is Francis, of course, as a Jesuit. So it was just really encouraging and delightful. And the other thing about it is he was in a great mood. Um, we had heard earlier, the day before, that he had gotten sick. He had some kind of cold, so he canceled all of his appointments and all of his audiences. And so we were thinking, oh my gosh, that's it. We're not going to meet Francis. But he insisted on meeting us. And you could tell by the way he was conducting himself, this was different. We were not heads of state. We were not religious leaders. We were just writers, and I think he just delighted in meeting such ordinary people, but people who were doing something that he thought was very important. So yeah, it was he was ebullient. We were ebullient. It was just really a wonderful experience meeting him, and we felt as though he had really opened the door of his, not only the doors of his palace to us, but the doors of his heart to us. And yeah, it's an unforgettable moment.
And you were able to give him a couple of your poetry books, correct?
Yes, and in fact, I hope I have a copy of one of them that I gave him. It's been a book. Oh, yes, I do. I chose two books to give to him. One was my most recent book called Holy Land, which I thought this is right up the Pope's alley. He's going to love Holy Land. But the other one that I gave him is this one. It's called Saint Sinatra.
Oh, that's awesome.
And you can see, and this book, the theme of this book is the blessedness and holiness of artists because they give us beauty, and
Mm.
beauty is the instantiation of goodness in the world. And if the test case is Sinatra, because if there's room for Sinatra in this the communion of saints, there's room for all of us, right? So I have Frank's mugshot superimposed over Frangelico's Procession of the Saints, and
Hmm.
as soon as Pope Francis looked at the cover, he laughed. And I knew he would, because he has a great sense of humor, and so hopefully he read a poem or two. I don't know. I was hoping it would one of the poems would show up in one of his homilies, but that didn't happen, at least not to my knowledge. But he received our gifts very graciously, and yeah, so it was really a great day.
Yeah, that's an amazing experience you were able to have. I went through and I read his address that you linked to in your America article, and oh my gosh, there are just some really stunning quotes. And I wanted to get your reaction to one of them, and you include this in your article. Pope Francis said, "This then is your task as poets, storytellers, filmmakers, and artists to give life, flesh, and verbal expression to all that humanity experiences, feels, dreams, and endures, thus creating harmony and beauty. This evangelical task also helps us come to a deeper understanding of God as the great poet of humanity." What does that quote mean to you? What did his address that he spoke directly to you all? What did that mean to you that day?
Yes, that was one of the standout quotations. Pope Francis is very quotable, and and there are a bunch in there that are great, but that's one of my favorites. What we all I think immediately recognize is Francis understands art and he understands poetry and he knows what poetry does. We don't talk about God or about Jesus or about the Holy Spirit. Like we instantiate God, the Holy Spirit and Jesus in the work that we do. This is not theology, it's not philosophy, it's not an ology at all. It is a made thing, an artifact, hopefully a beautiful artifact, whether it's a painting or a sculpture or a piece of music, a film or a poem, in which we see God in when we experience the divine in the process of reading the poem or looking at the statue or watching the film. And Francis gets that, this idea of enfleshment, this idea of making palpable for people to feel and touch and taste and smell God. And Francis, of course, is famous for his wonderful expressions that talk about enfleshment. Remember, one of his directives to priests and pastors when he first became pope was like, "Go out among the people so you get the smell of the sheep on you," which is just such a lovely expression because the fact is, a shepherd the sheep know his smell and he knows their smell, and that sort of elemental connection to the real. The Catholic writer Flannery O'Connor talks about the artist lives his or her life in hotly in pursuit of the real. And Francis always struck me as somebody whose feet were firmly on the ground. He was very much in pursuit of the real. We've had other marvelous popes who were scholars, and sort of lived a very heady kind of intellectual life. That was not Francis. He was somebody who lived, was much more earthbound, like us writers, because we're pretty earthbound in many ways. Even though poets have this reputation for being like, prophetic and sort of otherworldly, really, we're pretty earthy people.
Yeah, yeah, the famous quote about being able the scent, the smell of the shepherd and the sheep. I mean, it's so visceral, as in the Franciscan world, we really connect that to Saint Francis of Assisi and this incarnational spirituality, but it's really like you said, it's a really beautiful thing to have a pope who is so down to earth and earthy, like you said. It's a great word. I mean, someone who's about experience and yeah, yeah. I cannot believe that you were able to have that experience there with a bunch of other artists with him.
Yes,
It's
yes.
incredible.
Well, it really was incredible. And I will mention, just to drop a name, besides Pope Francis's name, one of the people who was with us was Martin Scorsese. And it was so charming to watch the two of those because here they are, both men in their 80s, right? Both still at the height of their powers, and they were like schoolboys. Scorsese was obviously so delighted to meet Pope Francis, and Pope Francis was so delighted to meet him. And so there was just something about and Scorsese, of course, is a very, very famous Catholic artist, and somebody whose work is it's very contemporary, and it also is very controversial. And here's Francis. Francis embraces everybody. Here's Francis, embracing him. Everybody brought the Pope a gift, but the gift that Scorsese brought this was just before his film, The Killers of the Flower Moon, came out, which is about the Osage people. So his gift to Pope Francis was a calligraphied copy of the Our Father written in the Osage language. Um,
Oh, wow.
so it's just so perfect, such a beautiful, irreplaceable gift. Who else would do that, and why? So that was also very touching to witness that coming together of these two. In fact, those of us who were not famous people often refer to that day that we met Francis as the day we met the two popes.
That's great.
Yeah, so it was really a lovely day, not just for those of us who are less well known writers, but even for people who were very well known. Like they knew no, Scorsese knew I'm in the presence of greatness, and I'm very humbled by it. Yeah.